Ethan Carter drove slowly down the familiar road that led to Willow Creek, his small hometown. He hadn't been back in years, not since he left for college and built a life in the city. But now, as he turned onto the winding country lane lined with tall oaks, memories began flooding back. Some were happy ones, playing catch with his dad in the backyard, biking through these same streets with his sister Lily. Others were darker, memories he had tried hard to forget. The reason for his return weighed heavily on him. It was not just nostalgia or homesickness, it was death. An old family friend named Mr. Peterson had passed away, and Ethan felt it was important to attend the funeral. More than that, though, he wanted to visit his sister's grave. Lily had died when they were both children, and even after all this time, her loss still lingered like an open wound. As Ethan pulled into the driveway of his childhood home, he couldn't help but notice how much everything had changed and yet how little. The house looked smaller somehow, its white paint peeling slightly at the edges. The garden his mother used to tend so carefully was now overgrown with weeds. Still, stepping out of the car, Ethan felt a strange sense of comfort being here again. This place held pieces of him that no other place ever could. After unpacking his things, Ethan decided to head to the cemetery before it got too dark. He had always planned to come back someday, but never actually thought he would go through with it. Now, standing outside the gates of Willow Creek Cemetery, he realized how nervous he felt. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed the creaky iron gate open and stepped inside. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and pine needles. Rows of headstones stretched out before him, each one marking someone's final resting place. For a moment, Ethan paused, letting his eyes scan the area until he spotted the section where Lily's grave was located. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he made his way toward it. When he finally reached her headstone, Ethan stopped. The name carved into the smooth gray surface read Lily Carter, along with the dates of her short life. Beneath those words there was a small inscription, "Beloved daughter and sister." Reading it brought tears to his eyes, though he quickly blinked them away. He knelt down, brushing away some leaves that had gathered around the base of the stone. But then something caught his attention. Near the bottom of the headstuff, close to the ground, the soil looked disturbed, as if someone had recently dug around it. Fresh dirt was piled up unevenly, contrasting sharply with the rest of the well-maintained graves nearby. Ethan frowned, leaning closer to examine it more carefully. There were no tools lying around, no signs of anyone working here today. So why did it look like someone had tampered with Lily's grave? A chill ran down Ethan's spine as questions began swirling in his mind. Who would do such a thing? And why? He glanced around the cemetery, half expecting to see someone watching, him from the shadows. But the place was deserted, silent except for the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. He stood up, brushing dirt off his hands, and took a step back. Whatever was going on here, it didn't sit right with him. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. Ethan knew he couldn't ignore it. If someone had messed with his sister's grave, he needed to find out why. Before leaving the cemetery, Ethan snapped a few photos of the disturbed soil with his phone. Maybe it was nothing, just an animal digging or maintenance work gone unnoticed. Or maybe it wasn't. Either way, he resolved to look into it further once he returned home. On the drive back, Ethan's thoughts kept drifting back to Lily. She had been only 10 years old when she died while he was 12. Their parents rarely spoke about what happened, brushing off his questions whenever he asked. Over time, Ethan learned to stop asking altogether. But now, standing by her grave and seeing that fresh dirt, old wounds began reopening. What really happened to Lily? Why did their parents act like it was something shameful, something to be hidden? By the time Ethan arrived back at the house, night had fallen completely. The stars twinkled faintly above, partially obscured by clouds. He parked the car and went inside, flipping on the lights. The living room looked exactly as he remembered. The worn couch, the faded curtains, the old clock ticking steadily on the wall. Everything seemed frozen in time, untouched since the last time he'd been here. Ethan sat down heavily on the couch, staring blankly at the photos hanging on the walls. Most of them were family portraits, capturing moments from happier times. One picture in particular caught his eye. A candid shot of him and Lily sitting together under the big oak tree in their backyard. They were laughing, their faces lit up with joy. Looking at it now made his chest ache. Just then there was a knock at the door. Startled, Ethan got up and opened it to find Rachel Moore standing on the porch. Rachel had been his best friend, growing up, and they had stayed in touch sporadically over the years. Seeing her face brought a flicker of warmth to Ethan's otherwise troubled evening. "Hey, stranger," Rachel said with a smile, stepping inside. Her blonde hair was tied, back in a loose ponytail, and she wore a light sweater against the evening chill. "I heard you were coming back for the funeral, thought I'd stop by and say hi." "Thanks," Ethan replied, closing the door behind her. "It's good to see you." They caught up briefly, chatting about work, life in Willow Creek, and mutual friends. Eventually, the conversation shifted to more serious topics. Ethan told Rachel about visiting Lily's grave and noticing the disturbed soil. To his surprise, Rachel's expression grew uneasy. "That's weird," she said softly, avoiding his gaze. "Really weird." "What do you mean?" Ethan pressed. Rachel hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I don't know if I should say anything, but there have been rumors lately. Weird stuff happening around town. People hearing strange noises at night, seeing shadows moving between the trees. Even animals acting strangely. No one knows what's causing it." Ethan listened intently, his unease growing. "Do you think it has anything to do with Lily's grave?" "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "But your sister's death, it was always kind of mysterious, wasn't it? Your parents never really talked about it, or neither did anyone else." That much was true. Ethan nodded slowly, his mind racing. Whatever was going on, it seemed clear that he wouldn't get answers by staying idle. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start digging deeper, literally and figuratively. Someone, somewhere, must know the truth about what happened to Lily. And Ethan was determined to find out. For now, though, he pushed those thoughts aside and focused on spending time with Rachel. They ordered pizza and watched an old movie together, laughing at jokes that hadn't aged well. By the end of the night, Ethan felt a bit lighter, reminded of the simpler days when life hadn't been so complicated. As Rachel left and Ethan prepared for bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something big, something that would change everything he thought he knew about his past. Little did he realize just how far-reaching the truth would be. The next morning, Ethan woke up early, his mind still buzzing with questions about Lily's grave. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, not just with the disturbed soil, but with the way everyone seemed to avoid talking about her death. Determined to uncover the truth, he decided to start where most secrets were buried, in the past. Rachel had agreed to help him, so after grabbing some coffee from the local diner, they headed to the Willow Creek Public Library. It was a small building tucked away on the edge of town, rarely visited except by students doing research or elderly residents looking for books to pass the time. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and ink, and rows of shelves stretched toward the ceiling packed with books and archives. Ethan and Rachel made their way to the reference section, where old newspapers and town records were kept. They began sifting through boxes labeled with dates from decades ago, searching for anything related to Lily's death. The work was slow and tedious, flipping through brittle pages covered in faded print. But as they dug deeper, patterns started emerging, small clues pointing to something far bigger than either of them had imagined. One article caught Ethan's attention. It was dated a few weeks before Lily's death and mentioned experiments conducted by a scientist named Dr. Harold Grayson. According to the piece, Grayson had been working on groundbreaking genetic research aimed at enhancing human abilities. However, the tone of the article was cautious, hinting that his methods might not have been entirely ethical. Even more unsettling was the fact that Grayson disappeared shortly after Lily died, leaving behind no trace of what he had been working on. "Who is this guy?" Ethan muttered aloud, showing the article to Rachel. She skimmed it quickly, her brow furrowing. "I've heard whispers about him," she said quietly. "People used to say he lived out in the woods, running secret experiments. My grandma used to warn me not to go near his lab when I was a kid." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Could Grayson somehow be connected to Lily? If so, what did that mean? He set the article aside and continued searching, hoping to find more concrete evidence. As the hours passed, they stumbled upon another clue, a letter written by a nurse who had worked at the hospital during Lily's final days. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic, and the content was cryptic. "They took her," the letter read. "She wasn't like the others, too special. They said it was for her own good, but I saw the fear in her eyes. Whatever they're planning, it's wrong." Rachel gasped when she read it. This sounds like someone knew exactly what was happening to Lily and didn't agree with it. Ethan nodded grimly. But who are they, and what does too special even mean? They spent the rest of the afternoon piecing together fragments of information. Each new discovery raised more questions than answers. By the time the sun began setting outside, casting long shadows across the library floor, Ethan and Rachel realized they needed to speak to someone who might remember those days firsthand. Margaret Hayes was one of the few people left in Willow Creek who had lived through that time. Now in her late 70s, she had worked as a nurse at the hospital back then. Rachel suggested visiting her, knowing Margaret often spent her evenings sitting on her porch, watching the world go by. They arrived at Margaret's house. She greeted them warmly, though her smile faltered slightly when Ethan introduced himself. "You look just like your father," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "And you remind me of Lily." Ethan swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. After exchanging pleasantries, he explained why they had come. At first, Margaret hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. But eventually, she sighed and invited them to sit down. "What do you want to know?" she asked, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "We found some things," Ethan began carefully. "About Lily, about Dr. Grayson. We think there might be more to her story than we were told." Margaret's expression darkened. For a long moment she stared off into the distance, lost in thought. Then she began speaking in a low, steady voice. "Lily wasn't like other children," she said finally. "She had gifts, abilities that shouldn't exist. She could make people feel things, happiness, calmness, even pain, just by touching them. Your parents didn't understand it. Neither did anyone else. When she got sick, they brought her to the hospital hoping we could figure out what was wrong. But instead of helping her, they called Grayson." Ethan's heart sank. "What happened after that?" Margaret shook her head. "I don't know all the details. All I know is that Lily never came home. Her body wasn't placed in the coffin. They buried something else instead. I tried to stop them, but no one listened. Everyone was scared, Ethan. Scared of what she could do. Scared of what they didn't understand." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as he listened. He had always known his sister was different, but hearing it confirmed like this broke something inside him. "Where is she now?" he whispered hoarsely. Margaret looked away, guilt etched onto her face. "I wish I could tell you. After they took her, no one ever saw her again. Not alive anyway." Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Ethan felt overwhelmed, torn between anger and grief. How could his parents and the entire town have let this happen? Why hadn't anyone spoken up? Rachel reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll find her," she promised softly. "Whatever it takes." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure if he believed her. Finding Lily seemed impossible, especially after so many years. But giving up wasn't an option. Not anymore. On the drive back to Ethan's house, neither of them spoke much. The weight of what they had learned hung over them like a storm cloud. When they arrived, Ethan walked straight to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, trying to steady his nerves. Rachel joined him, leaning against the counter. "So what's our next move?" she asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. We follow the trail. Start with Grayson's lab. If anyone knows what happened to Lily, it's probably there. Rachel nodded, though her expression was wary. Do you really think we'll find anything? That place has been abandoned for years. We won't know unless we try, Ethan replied firmly. Tomorrow morning we'll head out there, together. Despite her reservations, Rachel agreed. As they prepared for bed, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about everything Margaret had said. His sister had been taken because she was special, because she was different. And somewhere out there, hidden in the ruins of Grayson's lab, might be the key to understanding why. As he drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in his mind. What if finding the truth meant confronting something far darker and far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined? The next morning, Ethan woke up before sunrise, his mind racing with thoughts of what they might find at Dr. Grayson's old lab. He didn't sleep well, not after everything Margaret had told them the night before. The idea that Lily had been taken because of her gifts weighed heavily on him. What kind of world would treat someone so special like a monster? And what had happened to her after she disappeared? Rachel arrived just as the sun was peeking over the horizon, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner. She handed one to Ethan, who thanked her with a grateful nod. They climbed into his car and drove out of town, following directions Rachel had found online about the location of Grayson's lab. It wasn't easy to get there. The road leading to it was narrow and overgrown with weeds, but eventually, they reached the edge of the woods where the lab was supposed to be. They parked the car and stepped out, staring into the dense forest ahead. The air smelled damp and earthy, and the only sounds were birds chirping softly in the distance. Ethan tightened the straps on his backpack, which held flashlights, water bottles, and a notebook for jotting down anything important they might discover. Are you ready? Rachel asked, glancing at him nervously. As ready as I'll ever be, Ethan replied, though his voice betrayed his unease. Together they ventured into the woods, using a map Rachel had printed to guide them. After about 20 minutes of walking, they spotted the first signs of human interference. Broken branches cleared to form a crude path, rusty metal poles sticking out of the ground like skeletal remains. Finally, they emerged into a clearing, where the lab stood, or rather, what was left of it. The building was decrepit, its once white walls now gray and crumbling. Windows were shattered or boarded up, and vines crept along the exterior, reclaiming the structure for nature. A faded sign hung above the entrance reading, Grayson Research Facility, in peeling letters. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at it. This place looked like something out of a horror movie. This is it, Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. Let's go inside. Ethan nodded and pushed open the heavy metal door, which groaned loudly as if protesting their intrusion. Inside, the lab was even darker than it appeared from outside. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows on the floor. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled stale, almost metallic. They turned on their flashlights and began exploring cautiously. The first room they entered seemed to have been an office. Desks were overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied onto the floor. Papers littered the ground, some yellowed with age, others crumpled into balls. Ethan bent down to pick one up, brushing off the dust. It was filled with scribbled notes and diagrams, strange shapes and symbols that made no sense to him. What do you think this means? He asked, showing the paper to Rachel. She shook her head. I don't know, but it doesn't look normal. Maybe these are part of whatever experiments Grayson was doing. As they moved deeper into the lab, the rooms became stranger. One contained rows of glass tanks, most of them shattered, but a few still intact. Inside those remaining tanks floated unidentifiable objects, twisted forms suspended in murky liquid. Ethan shuddered, unable to look away. In another room, they found shelves lined with jars containing preserved specimens. Some looked like animals, while others didn't. Ethan felt sick to his stomach as he realized these creatures weren't natural. They had been altered somehow. Was this what happened when science went too far? But the real breakthrough came when they stumbled upon a locked door at the end of a long hallway. The lock was rusted and weak, and with some effort, Ethan managed to break it open. Beyond the door was a smaller chamber, clearly designed for storage. In the corner sat a pile of journals bound together with twine. "These must belong to Grayson," Ethan said, picking up the bundle carefully. He flipped through the pages, scanning the cramped handwriting. Each entry detailed progress on various experiments, including mentions of subjects referred to only by numbers, not names. One name, however, appeared repeatedly: Lily Carter. Rachel leaned over his shoulder, reading along with him. Her breath hitched when she saw it. "This is her," she murmured. "It has to be." Ethan nodded, his hands trembling as he continued reading. According to the journals, Lily had indeed possessed extraordinary abilities. Abilities that fascinated Grayson. He described her as a perfect subject, documenting how she could manipulate emotions simply by touching someone. At first, his tone was clinical, detached. But as the entries progressed, it became clear that things had spiraled out of control. "He kept testing her," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion, "pushing her limits until she couldn't take it anymore. Look." He pointed to a passage describing how Lily had become increasingly unstable, lashing out uncontrollably during sessions. Then near the end of the journal came the final entry. "Subject 12 has escaped containment. Measures have failed. Evacuating facility immediately. Whatever emerges from this will not be contained." Ethan closed the journal, his heart pounding. That's why he left. Something happened here, something bad enough to make him abandon everything. Rachel placed a hand on his arm. "We need to keep looking. There's more here. I can feel it." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. They searched the rest of the lab, uncovering more disturbing evidence of Grayson's work. In one room, they found a massive machine connected to wires and tubes. Its purpose was unclear, but based on the notes scrawled nearby, it seemed to amplify the abilities of whoever used it. Another room held cages, small cramped spaces that sent chills down Ethan's spine. Whoever, or whatever, had been kept here hadn't lived comfortably. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained, they decided to leave. As they stepped back outside, the sunlight filtering through the trees felt almost foreign compared to the oppressive darkness of the lab. Neither of them spoke much on the drive home, both lost in their own thoughts. That night, Ethan sat alone in his room, going over the journals again. Every word confirmed what he had feared. Lily hadn't died naturally. She had been taken, experimented on, and ultimately driven to escape. But where did she go after that? And what had she become? He glanced at the photo of Lily on his desk, her bright smile frozen in time. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry, not just for her loss, but for the pain she endured. When Rachel knocked on his door later, he wiped his eyes and let her in. "We'll figure this out," she said softly. "Whatever happened to her, we'll find the truth." Ethan nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. Finding answers meant facing the unknown, and possibly something far worse than either of them could imagine. But giving up wasn't an option, not when Lily's memory depended on it. The days following their visit to Grayson's lab were a blur for Ethan and Rachel. They spent hours poring over the journals, trying to piece together what had happened after Lily escaped. One thing was clear: whatever emerged from that lab wasn't entirely human anymore. The notes described failed experiments, unstable creations, and warnings about uncontainable entities. It didn't take long for Ethan to connect the dots. The strange noises people had been hearing around town, the shadows moving between trees, the whispers in the night, they all pointed to one conclusion. Something, or someone, was still out there. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this thing might be connected to Lily. If she had escaped the lab, could she have survived? Could she have changed into something else entirely? He didn't want to believe it, but deep down, he knew they needed to confront the possibility head-on. That evening, as dusk settled over Willow Creek, Ethan and Rachel returned to the cemetery. Armed with flashlights, a camera, and makeshift Weapons, a baseball bat and a crowbar, they approached Lily's grave cautiously. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with an unspoken tension. Mist rolled across the ground, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. "Do you think it'll show up?" Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Ethan replied, gripping his flashlight tightly. "But if it does, we'll be ready." They positioned themselves near Lily's headstone, keeping watch. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as they waited, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant hoot of an owl. Just when Ethan began to doubt whether anything would happen, a low growl echoed through the cemetery. Rachel froze, clutching the crowbar tighter. "Did you hear that?" Ethan nodded, his heart racing. Slowly, he turned the flashlight toward the source of the sound. At first, all he could see was movement, a shifting shape in the mist. Then, the figure stepped forward, emerging from the shadows. It was unlike anything either of them had ever seen. Humanoid in form but grotesquely altered, the creature stood tall, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Its skin was pale and cracked, as though it hadn't seen sunlight in years. Tattered remnants of clothing hung loosely from its body, and its eyes glowed faintly yellow, piercing through the darkness. But what struck Ethan most was the expression on its face. Not anger or malice, but pain. Deep, overwhelming sorrow. "What is that?" Rachel gasped, taking a step back. Ethan hesitated, unsure how to respond. Something about the creature felt familiar, almost recognizable. As it moved closer, he realized why. It carried fragments of Lily's essence. The way it tilted its head slightly, the softness in its movements despite its terrifying appearance. It reminded him of her. "Stay back," Ethan shouted, raising the flashlight like a weapon. The creature stopped abruptly, tilting its head again as if studying him. For a moment, no one moved. Then, it spoke, not with words, but with emotions flooding directly into Ethan's mind. Sadness, longing, regret. It was overwhelming, forcing him to drop to his knees as tears streamed down his face. Rachel rushed to his side, shaking him gently. "Ethan, are you okay? What's happening?" "It's her," Ethan managed to choke out, staring at the creature. "It's Lily." Rachel looked at him in disbelief. "That's not possible." "Yes, it is," Ethan insisted, his voice breaking. "She's trying to tell me something." Summoning his courage, Ethan stood up and took a cautious step toward the creature. "Lily?" he called softly. "Is that you?" The creature let out a soft, guttural sound, almost like a sob. It reached out a hand toward him, its fingers trembling. Ethan hesitated, then extended his own hand, letting the creature touch his palm lightly. Instantly, images flooded his mind. Flashes of memories, sensations, emotions. He saw glimpses of the lab, of being strapped to a table while machines whirred around her. He felt the agony of transformation, the loss of herself, and the desperate need to escape. And finally, he saw flashes of hiding in the woods, watching the town from afar, unable to return without causing harm. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he pulled away. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know." The creature lowered its hand, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. It let out another soft sound, almost mournful, before stepping back into the shadows. Rachel grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him away. "We can't stay here," she urged. "Whatever that thing is, it's dangerous." "No," Ethan said firmly, turning to face her. "That's my sister. She's scared and alone. We have to help her." "But how?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "We're not scientists. We don't even know what we're dealing with." Ethan thought for a moment, remembering something from the journals. Grayson wrote about a frequency that could neutralize unstable energy. If we can recreate it, maybe we can calm her down, or at least give her peace. Rachel stared at him, torn between fear and determination. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, let's do it." Over the next few days, Ethan and Rachel worked tirelessly, to build a device based on Grayson's notes. Using parts scavenged from old electronics and instructions pieced together from the journals, they constructed a crude machine capable of emitting the specified frequency. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best they could do under the circumstances. When the device was ready, they returned to the cemetery, hoping the creature would appear again. This time, they came prepared, not just with the machine, but with a plan. As night fell, the mist returned, swirling thickly around the graves. Ethan set the device on the ground near Lily's headstone, flipping the switch to activate it. A low hum filled the air, vibrating softly beneath their feet. Almost immediately, the creature appeared, drawn by the sound. It approached cautiously, its movement slower this time. When it reached the edge of the frequency field, it paused, its glowing eyes flickering uncertainly. Ethan stepped forward, holding out his hands in a gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're here to help you." For a moment, the creature simply stood there, swaying slightly as if caught between instincts. Then it let out a final haunting cry before collapsing to the ground. The glow in its eyes faded completely, leaving behind only stillness. Ethan knelt beside it, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Lily," he whispered. "I should have been there for you." Rachel joined him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Together they sat in silence, mourning the sister and the life that never truly had a chance. Though they couldn't bring her back, they vowed to lay her spirit to rest properly. With heavy hearts, they buried the creature alongside Lily's empty grave, finally giving both pieces of her soul the closure they deserved. The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling heavier than ever before. His body was tired, but it was his heart that bore the real weight. After everything they had uncovered about Lily, her abilities, her suffering, and her transformation into something unrecognizable, he couldn't stop thinking about how much she had endured alone. And now, after finally laying her spirit to rest, he felt a mix of relief and emptiness. Relief that she was no longer trapped between worlds, and emptiness because saying goodbye didn't make the pain go away. Rachel came by later that day, carrying coffee and a bag of pastries from the local bakery. She found Ethan sitting on the porch steps, staring off into the distance. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days, even though he'd been in bed most of the night. "You okay?" Rachel asked gently, sitting down beside him. Ethan shrugged, not trusting himself to speak right away. "I don't know," he admitted after a pause. "I thought finding out what happened to Lily would give me closure, but all it did was open up more wounds." Rachel nodded, handing him a cup of coffee. "It's not easy facing the truth, especially when it's painful, but you did the right thing. You gave her peace." "I hope so," Ethan murmured, taking a sip of the warm drink. "But I can't help wondering, why didn't anyone say anything? Why did everyone just let this happen?" Rachel sighed, looking at her hands. "People are scared of things they don't understand. Back then, Lily's abilities must have seemed like some kind of curse, or worse, a threat. Instead of helping her, they pushed her away. It's awful, but it's human nature." Ethan shook his head bitterly. "That doesn't make it okay. My parents, they acted like losing her was normal, like burying an empty coffin was fine. How could they live with themselves?" "They probably didn't," Rachel said softly. "Your mom never smiled the same way after Lily disappeared. Neither did your dad. Maybe they were trying to protect themselves to survive the guilt. That doesn't excuse it, but it might explain it." Ethan didn't respond. He knew Rachel was right, but understanding their choices didn't make them hurt any less. For years, he had carried the grief of losing his sister without fully understanding why. Now, knowing the truth only made it harder to forgive. Later, that afternoon, Ethan decided to visit Margaret Hayes again. He wanted answers, not just about Lily, but about the town's role in covering up what happened. When he arrived at her house, Margaret greeted him with a wary expression, as if she already knew why he was there. "Come in," she said quietly, stepping aside to let him enter. They sat down in her living room, where the faint scent of lavender filled the air. Ethan got straight to the point. Why didn't anyone speak up about Lily? About Grayson? You knew what was happening. Why didn't you stop it? Margaret lowered her eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. You're right, I did know, and every day since then I've regretted staying silent. But you have to understand, Ethan, we were afraid. Afraid of what Grayson might do if we interfered. Afraid of what Lily might become if we couldn't control her. Fear makes people do terrible things. But fear doesn't justify letting an innocent child suffer. Ethan shot back, his voice rising despite himself. She wasn't dangerous. She was special. I know that now, Margaret replied, tears welling up in her eyes. But back then we didn't see it that way. All we saw was chaos. The experiments, the rumors, the disappearances. We convinced ourselves it was better to look the other way. Better for us anyway, not for her. Ethan clenched his fists, struggling to keep his anger in check. And what about my parents? Did they know what happened to her? Margaret hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. They suspected something was wrong. Dr. Grayson told them Lily needed specialized care, that she'd be safe. They trusted him, Ethan. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. Too late for what? Ethan demanded. To save her? To tell me the truth? To give her a proper burial? All of it, Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. They tried to move on, to pretend everything was normal, but deep down they were broken. Your father started drinking heavily. Your mother barely left the house. Losing Lily destroyed them, Ethan. And maybe part of them believed lying was easier than facing the reality of what they'd done. Ethan leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. He had always resented his parents for shutting him out after Lily's death, but now he understood it wasn't just about him. It was about their own inability to cope. Still, it didn't change the fact that their silence had cost him years of knowing the truth. After leaving Margaret's house, Ethan drove aimlessly around Willow Creek, letting his thoughts wander. Every street, every corner reminded him of Lily, their childhood adventures, their laughter, the bond they shared. He parked near the park where they used to play and walked along the path, memories flooding back with each step. Eventually, he found himself at the edge of the woods, staring toward the direction of Grayson's lab. The idea of returning there filled him with dread, but he knew it was necessary. There were still questions unanswered, pieces of the puzzle missing. If he wanted true closure, he couldn't leave anything behind. When he got home, Rachel was waiting for him. She had brought dinner, homemade lasagna, and insisted they eat together. As they sat at the kitchen table, she noticed the distant look in his eyes. "What's going through your mind?" she asked, setting down her fork. "I need to go back to the lab," Ethan said simply. "There's more there. I can feel it." Rachel frowned, concern etched on her face. "Are you sure that's a good idea? Last time we went, it nearly killed us." "I'm not saying it'll be easy," Ethan replied. "But I can't walk away until I know everything, until I understand what happened to Lily, and why." Rachel studied him for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "If you're going, I'm coming with you. No arguments." The next morning, they packed supplies and headed back to the woods. The journey felt different this time, less about discovery and more about reckoning. When they reached the lab, the building loomed before them like a ghost of the past, its broken windows and crumbling walls whispering secrets they weren't ready to hear. Inside, they searched methodically, focusing on areas they hadn't explored thoroughly before. In one hidden room, they found a locked cabinet. Using tools they'd brought, Ethan pried it open to reveal stacks of old photographs and documents. Among them was a letter addressed to Lily's parents, a confession written by Dr. Grayson himself. In the letter, Grayson admitted to using Lily as a test subject, claiming her unique abilities offered unparalleled potential. He expressed regret for pushing her too far, acknowledging that his experiments had caused irreversible damage. The final line sent chills down Ethan's spine. "I failed her. I failed all of you. Whatever emerges from my work will bear my sins and yours." Ethan folded the letter carefully, his hands shaking. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is the proof we needed." Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. Now what? Now, Ethan replied, determination hardening. His voice, we tell the truth. Everyone deserves to know what happened here. As they left the lab, the sun broke through the clouds, casting light over the forest floor. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope, not for himself, but for the future. By exposing the lies and honoring Lily's memory, he hoped to heal the wounds that had festered in Willow Creek for far too long. The decision to share what they had uncovered didn't come easily to Ethan. For days he wrestled with how and whether to reveal the truth about Lily and Dr. Grayson's experiments. He knew it would upset the fragile peace of Willow Creek, forcing people to confront painful memories they had buried long ago. But he also believed that staying silent was no longer an option. If there was any chance of healing, the town needed to face its past. Rachel supported him fully, helping him organize the information they had gathered into something coherent. They compiled copies of Grayson's journals, photographs from the lab, and Margaret's testimony into a folder, along with the letter Grayson had written to Lily's parents. It wasn't much, but it was enough to prove that the town's dark secrets couldn't stay hidden forever. Ethan decided to hold a meeting at the cemetery, near Lily's grave. He invited everyone in Willow Creek, friends, neighbors, even those who had moved away but still kept ties to the town. At first, many were reluctant to attend. Some thought it was unnecessary to dig up old wounds, while others simply didn't want to hear what Ethan had to say. But curiosity eventually won out, and on the chosen day a small crowd gathered around the headstone. Standing in front of them, Ethan felt nervous, but determined. He held the folder tightly in his hands, glancing at Rachel for reassurance before beginning. I called you all here today because I believe the truth matters, Ethan started, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. For years we've lived with lies about my sister Lily, about her death, about what happened to her. Today I'm going to tell you everything I've learned. He opened the folder and began sharing the evidence they had found, the articles about Grayson's experiments, the notes detailing Lily's abilities and the disturbing conditions she endured in the lab. As he spoke, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked shocked, others angry or guilty. A few turned away, unable to face what they were hearing. When Ethan reached the part about Lily escaping and transforming into the creature they had encountered, his voice broke slightly. She wasn't dangerous, he said firmly, looking directly at the townspeople. She was scared, alone, and instead of helping her, we abandoned her. We let fear dictate our actions, and now we're paying the price for it. Margaret stepped forward then, her frail frame trembling as she addressed the crowd. Ethan is right, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. We failed Lily. I failed her. I should have spoken up when I had the chance. Instead, I stayed silent like so many of us did, and for that I am truly sorry. Her words struck a chord with the others. Slowly, one by one, people began sharing their own regrets, about ignoring the signs, about trusting Grayson blindly, about letting fear cloud their judgment. It was cathartic, like opening a wound to clean out the infection beneath. Afterward, Ethan asked if anyone wanted to say a few words about Lily. To his surprise, several people came forward, sharing fond memories of her laughter, her kindness, and the way she lit up every room she entered. Even those who hadn't known her personally spoke about how her story had touched them, reminding them of the importance of compassion over fear. By the end of the gathering, the mood had shifted. The weight of secrecy and shame that had hung over Willow Creek for decades seemed lighter, replaced by a sense of collective grief and resolve. People lingered afterward, talking quietly among themselves, lighting candles, and leaving flowers at Lily's grave. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the cemetery, Ethan stood beside Rachel, watching the scene unfold. Do you think this will make a difference? He asked softly. It already has, Rachel replied, smiling faintly. You gave them the truth. Now it's up to them to decide what to do with it. Ethan nodded, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in years. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, for him or for the town, but at least they were moving forward together. Later that night, back at his childhood home, Ethan sat alone in the living room, staring at the photo of him and Lily under the oak tree. He missed her more than ever, but for the first time, he felt like he truly understood her. She hadn't been a monster. She had been a victim of circumstances beyond her control. And though she was gone, her memory would live on, not just in his heart, but in the hearts of everyone who had heard her story. Rachel joined him after a while, sitting down beside him without saying a word. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the distant hum of crickets outside. Eventually, Rachel broke the quiet. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "I'm staying here, at least for a while. This place holds too many pieces of me to walk away again. Besides, someone needs to make sure Willow Creek doesn't forget what happened." Rachel smiled, her eyes softening. "Then I'll stay too. You're not doing this alone." Grateful for her support, Ethan nodded. Together, they made plans to honor Lily's memory in other ways, by advocating for transparency and accountability in scientific research, and by supporting families affected by similar tragedies. It wouldn't bring Lily back, but it would ensure that her suffering wasn't in vain. In the weeks and months that followed, changes began to take root in Willow Creek. Conversations that had once been taboo became commonplace, as people worked to heal old wounds and build trust within the community. Memorials were erected in Lily's name, not just to remember her, but to remind everyone of the dangers of fear and ignorance. For Ethan, life slowly regained a sense of purpose. He spent his days working on projects inspired by Lily's legacy, always keeping her spirit close. Though the pain of losing her never fully disappeared, it became easier to carry, knowing that her story had brought light to the darkness. And so, in the quiet town of Willow Creek, a new chapter began. Not one of forgetting, but of remembering, of learning, of growing. Because sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that set us free.